a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Fun size, they say. Those things are tiny. Fun size would be a candy bar about the size of my shoe. That would be fun sized. I'm tempted to hand out small cups of coffee as Halloween treats. I wonder how that would go over. I'll bet the parents would be a little upset when their kids, their little monsters, came home all wired up on caffeine. If I did hand out coffee, it would be the best coffee in the universe. Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson. Julio has been making the best brew since 2015, but the sign says 2016. If you're unable to drive to Laredo to fulfill your coffee needs, go to organicmancoffeetrike.shop. I wonder if anyone will ever come out with an Annabelle Lee costume, the creepy little girl from Trailer Trash Terrors, who almost wound up as a person on Strange Things. Vic was absent for a while taking care of some relatives, and she got bored, and I guess she was thinking of coming over here. That would have been interesting. Scary, maybe a little creepy, but interesting. I started out looking for some scary stories from folks out at sea. I found the ones I had already done a show on, but nothing new and worth going into some more. It is the season for scary things, so here are a few stories to help you keep yourself awake at night. I found them by just randomly going from web page to web page. They're not in any kind of order, just written down as I found them. Names have been changed to protect me from angry people and nasty grams. Most of these stories didn't even have any names. It was just a story put out there. As far as I know, these are all true. I read them on several different websites. I sorted out the ones that sounded like complete bogus nonsense, and these are the ones I decided to stick with. Let's make fun-sized candy bars that are actually fun-sized. The kind that take all day. 1972, a 15-year-old girl, I'm going to call her Ashley, was visiting some friends of hers. Older kids that let her hang around with them. They all lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they were at, I'll call her friend, Beth. They were over at Beth's house. The older girls were smoking marijuana, the devil's cabbage, dope, and they were encouraging Ashley to have a hit or two. Ah, led astray by evil companions. She passed on the offer. Well, that's her story, and she's sticking to it. The problem with using substances to enjoy life is, if you do it enough, life gets less enjoyable. Eventually, you wind up having to use something just to make life worth living. Eventually, the only thing you enjoy is changing the way you feel. That can lead to stronger substance abuse if you're not careful. I have nothing against those who inhale their pleasures. They're far better than a bunch of drunks, but it is a slippery slope. Even alcohol, you do it too much and it's going to become a problem. Enough of that. Back to Ashley. Ashley had passed on the offer so she would stay on her feet. The weather took a turn and it suddenly became a bit chilly. Not having dressed for such weather, the young girl went inside to see about something to keep herself warm with. She knew the layout of the house, she'd been there often enough, and she went upstairs to her friend's bedroom. As Ashley was walking towards the bedroom, the wall began to move. The plaster and the paint was forming into some kind of a figure. What was that about not smoking dope? A form stepped out of the wall and it started advancing on her. It looked like someone in a black cloak that hung to the floor. Ashley doesn't know how long she stood there frozen with fear. The gang downstairs got to wondering what she was doing, so they called to her, and that was enough to break the spell. Ashley could make out a face on this shadow being. She turned and fled for the safety of those downstairs. Once back with her friends, she looked at everybody in the room, and in a voice that was not hers, she said, "The drugs and addiction were my fault, and I accept responsibility for that. But I was not that way deep down inside." Why would somebody in Ann Arbor have a southern accent? I want to apologize to everyone involved for what I have done. As soon as the words were out, Ashley was herself again. Everybody stood there staring at her. The bizarre utterance startled Beth, whose folks owned the house. And now, the rest of the story. I just had to say that. It turns out that the previous owner had gone from just smoking a little something now and then to injecting a little something now and then. I have to say this. Some people call marijuana a gateway drug. You start out smoking dope and then you're using harder stuff. It's inevitable. It ends with you murdering people in order to obtain your fix. I've heard supposedly smart people say this. It's all just something cooked up by Dr. Denise Candle to help the government lie to people about all things marijuana. In fact, it's nicotine that can lead you to harder drugs. But that's okay because big tobacco is financing part of our government. Okay. When the boys in the white lab coats, as well as the girls, are motivated by the almighty dollar, they'll lie like a rug to prove what the overlords want them to prove. That took a bit of a sidetrack, didn't it? Back to the former owner of the house. He needed more illegal substance to get the same thrill. He accidentally took too much of his drug of choice, and he died from an overdose. Beth liked to use a Ouija board. During one late night session, she summoned the guy that had died in the house. The ghost told her he had used all kinds of drugs, which led to his losing everything, including his girlfriend and his life. All that mattered was getting high. He told her his name, and she was able to find a picture of him. It matched the face on the shadow being that Ashley had seen. The gang was not in agreement when it came to the board. Some said it was just a game and the spirits had nothing to do with moving the planchette. Others thought the spirits were actually communicating with them. This led to arguments and many sessions to try to prove, one way or the other, it was or wasn't real. With every attempt, the answers became darker and scarier. The dead guy was getting a bit weirder every time he was summoned. Beth began using the board on her own. This is never a good idea. It's never a good idea to mess with a Ouija board to begin with. That's from another show. One night at an outdoor party, Beth got the board out and the gang crowded around to laugh and mock the spirits. The spirit was not amused. Beth tried to rein in the crowd and continued using the board. The spirit told her that a bunch of her friends from school were at this very same time also using a Ouija board. He said he was going back and forth between them. One of the boys, who had had too much to drink, grabbed the board and he tore it in two. This led to a huge discussion on what they should do now. One of the partygoers had seen a TV show and thought the thing to do was burn the board. This is a very bad idea. You don't burn Ouija boards or cursed items. Being a bunch of teenagers, most of them being drunk or high, they decided that this was the thing to do. The board wouldn't catch fire. They poured 2 cans of lighter fluid on it, and finally it turned to ashes. Beth was a bit upset that her favorite play toy was now nothing but a pile of ashes. She did know how to make a new one, and she planned to do this. Later, the kids did find out that a second group of kids from the same high school had also been using a Ouija board that same night. It also mentioned Beth and her friends to the others. The other board told the group they had made him angry. The guy that had torn the board was in a very bad vehicle accident and nearly died. Ashley doesn't know for sure if Beth ever did make the new board and is still using it or not. I hate dolls. The more lifelike they are, the more I hate them. Some folks love dolls, even when they do things on their own, even without any batteries. In 2013, a woman living in Houston bought a Disney Frozen Elsa doll, a doll from the movie Frozen. It wasn't actually frozen or even really cold. This was a Christmas gift for her daughter. The doll was designed to recite things from the movie and even sing a few songs. A press of the button would bring out all kinds of words in the voice that sounded like Elsa. The batteries needed replacing if the doll was used a lot, which it was. After a couple of years, the doll began to talk, even if the button wasn't pushed. It's no longer needing batteries either. The voice no longer sounded like Elsa, and it began to say things in Spanish once in a while. In December 2019, the family had had enough of this weirdness, and they threw the Elsa in the trash can. A few weeks later, they found the doll inside an old bench seat in the garage. The doll was no longer speaking English. It was saying everything in Spanish, a language it had never been programmed to use. The next time the doll was placed in a trash bag that was put inside a second trash bag and put in the very bottom of the trash can and then covered with real trash. They watched as the trash men dumped the can into the truck and drove away. Returning from a trip, they found the doll waiting for them in the backyard. In their last attempt to get rid of this Elsa, the family sent her by mail to a friend in Minnesota. He fastened the possessed doll to the front bumper of his truck. As of October 2020, The doll has not returned to Houston. But if you ever see a truck going down the road with Elsa tied to the bumper, that might be the doll. You might want to stay away from it. An old man was sitting on the front porch watching the day go by. I feel like doing that from time to time. As he sat there with no intention of getting up, he heard his wife calling him from inside. Nope, not in his plans, so he just stayed where he was. His wife went from just calling to demanding he get off his butt and go inside. He could only ignore her for so long, so he pulled himself up and went to see what needed his attention more than that chair. Just as the door was swinging shut, he heard a loud crashing sound from outside. Looking back out the door, he saw a huge oak tree had tipped over and landed right on top of his chair. The old man wanted to thank his wife for saving his life, so he got ready to drive into town to the cemetery. His wife had been dead for several years. A young man and his family were living in an old house that had been built in 1904. I'm going to call him Carlos. Carlos had started a garage band, only they practiced in the basement, like a lot of kids at the time. They focused on Spanish rock. They would play mostly on Sunday evenings. His younger brother, Juan, would sit in on occasion when he did not have to go into his job. The band usually knocked off around 8 p.m., and sometimes they decided to head to one of the other's houses to finish off the night doing teenage stuff. One fall evening, they ran out of steam and they were going to wrap up for the night. For unknown reasons, they decided to take their instruments with them to the next house, just in case they became inspired to play some more. Carlos handed his keys to his friends so they could get started loading up. Everyone had filed out of the basement, but they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen, down the hall, into the living room, and out to the front porch. Once the equipment was loaded, everybody was outside sitting in Carlos's truck waiting for him. Carlos was walking up the back stairs when he remembered he'd left something on the speaker in the basement. He tromped back down to get it. The basement was not laid out in any kind of a logical pattern, just utilitarian use. The heater set in the middle, walls were put up as people thought to put them up. It was a maze of sorts. Following the random trail of the far corner, he grabbed his items when movement caught his eye. Between him and the stairs was a shadowy figure, just a black shape with nothing to put it there. The thing made Carlos very uneasy. Uneasy moved to dread, which was followed by absolute fear. Mustering up what little courage he could, Carlos yelled at the shadow being, "Get out of here! I don't have time for this!" And Carlos began walking towards the stairs, staying as far from this shadow being as he could. Once past the being, he bolted up the stairs and out the door to the kitchen. Out of habit, he turned off the lights as he passed them. Once at the front door, he switched off the last light. Just inside the front door, he could feel the shadow was right behind him. Without looking, Carlos pulled the door shut and locked it. He walked down the front walk and jumped into his pickup. As he was putting it in gear, his friend said, "Wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" And Carlos said, "No, Juan is at work. He left a while ago." His friend looked around the front yard and asked, "Then who was walking along behind you a second ago?" Everyone had seen Juan walking right behind Carlos as he approached the truck. A couple, John and Carol, had moved into an old apartment in Laguna Beach. The building was put up in the 1920s. The kitchen and living room were at the front side by side. The master bedroom was on one side with a door leading to the bathroom. The bathroom had a second door that went to a hallway that connected the living room and two more bedrooms. Carol had headed out to meet a friend, and John was in the bedroom doing things. As he moved about the room, something caught his eye from the hallway. He looked closer, and he could see what looked like a small, maybe 3 feet tall, figure cloaked in a full-length black robe. The image looked like something a child had attempted to draw, as if she or he were trying to draw a scary figure. It was not all there, and the edges were not complete. As John watched the figure, it noticed that he was looking at it. It flew forward right at him and slammed the door to the bathroom. John was shocked and unsure what to do next. He went out the front door and he waited until Carol got back. Then he tried to explain the sighting to her. She was not impressed. You can't really call this a ghost, a thing, an entity, maybe something from another dimension. Two families, all related, lived in an apartment building. A father, mother, and two sons, Bill and Daniel, lived downstairs, and their uncle, aunt, and cousins lived above. The aunt and uncle had the room above the two boys. During summer vacation, the upstairs family would head out of town, while the downstairs family stayed to just enjoy the summers at home. 2006, while the upstairs family were away, Bill and Daniel heard somebody walking around upstairs. Heavy footsteps coming from the vacant apartment. They told their father, who, having a key, went to investigate. There was nobody there. Each night the sounds would come down from above as if somebody had snuck in and was using their aunt and uncle's place. They got to thinking. Maybe, just maybe, this was some unnatural thing, something paranormal, some kind of weirdness. They bought a mic and they snuck upstairs. The mic was placed in the aunt and uncle's bedroom. They ran the cord out the window and down to their own bedroom. It was plugged into a recording device, and they began monitoring the recordings while they were in their room doing other things. All was quiet upstairs. It wasn't until about the fourth night they heard the footsteps. Bill grabbed the keys and they ran upstairs. Stepping into the bedroom, Bill said, "What is your name? Who are you?" The two boys heard nothing. They walked back to the room and sat there wondering what was going on. Daniel played the recording back to where Bill asked, "What is your name?" They heard somebody walking across the room and then getting right down on the floor next to the mic, then saying, "Giuta," which is a Greek name. Some EVPs are so low or garbled you have to listen dozens of times to figure them out. This was as clear and loud as if this woman was right there next to them. They recovered the mic and put everything on a shelf in the closet, and they tried to pretend like nothing weird was happening. The grandmother one day, out of the blue, mentioned the former resident of the upstairs apartment used to be a Greek woman named Giata, who had suddenly died in the apartment at age 26. The authorities could find no reason for her death. For some mysterious reason, Vic keeps finding EVPs on his podcast, either Trailer Trash Terrors or Paranormal Rundown. They'll go back and listen to the recordings to edit things, and they'll pick up EVPs on their show. I've never tried that with my show, but then I don't like editing, so I don't even like the sound of my own voice. I very seldom listen to my own shows, so if any of y'all out there have ever heard anything weird in the background, let me know and I'll track it down and see what it is. A young lady, Diana, moved into a Melbourne apartment building built in the 30s. She made the place hers and got on with life. Returning from work one day, Diana found the board that covered the scuttle hole into the attic was laying on the floor in two pieces. She guessed someone had been sent to work in the attic, and the landlady hadn't told her that this was going to happen. She called the landlady to get the board replaced, and the landlady said that nobody had been in the apartment. She also said that the last two occupants of the apartment had had similar things happen. The landlady did send somebody by to replace the scuttle hole board. A month later, Diana woke up at about 4 a.m. Her body was covered in goose pimples. It felt as if somebody was lightly rubbing their hand up and down her body. There was no sound anywhere in the apartment, and the sensation had only lasted for seconds, but it was definitely there. It was followed by the sound of someone or something dragging what sounded like a large sack, maybe full of potatoes, around upstairs in the attic. Diana thought someone had broken in and was doing weird things in the space above. It took all she could muster to slip out of bed and run for the front door, out to her vehicle where she sat for the rest of the night. She waited until daylight before attempting to go back in. The front door was standing open. She swore she had closed it. Her pet bird that stayed in the kitchen was no longer in his cage. She eventually found him in the toilet, very wet and very pissed off. Diana dried her bird off and put him back in his cage. She went into the bathroom and found the board was once more on the floor in pieces. As she stood there, sounds came to her from above. It sounded like little kids singing. It's your turn now. It's your turn now. Diana was somehow able to stay for another 18 months in the apartment. The board would be broken about once every 2 months or so. The voices were never heard again, but finally Diana did move out. She heard from the landlady one day the new tenants were having some issues and they were wondering if she would call them, but she said she never did. A 10-year-old girl named Jane was sleeping in her bed when she felt somebody sit down on the edge. It felt as if her mother was there, only when she opened her eyes, it wasn't her mom. Jane could see a young boy about her age sitting next to her. This boy had no eyes, just two empty black holes. The boy held out a small box, but when Jane reached for it, he pulled it back to his chest. Jane found it odd. She wasn't scared by this eyeless boy, more curious. Jane reached towards the boy and asked him to hand over the box. Instead, he vanished. As she could still see the imprint in the blanket where he'd been sitting. She convinced herself this had all been just a bad dream of some sort. 5 years later, a Karen was over visiting. They were doing their homework together in Jane's bedroom. Once all the work was finished, Karen took a nap on Jane's bed. Jane was sitting next to the bed when Karen sat up and pointed one finger at the corner of the room overhead. This was immediately followed by Karen laying back down and returning to sleep. When Karen finally did wake up, Jane asked what she was pointing at by the ceiling. Karen said she'd seen a 10-year-old boy sitting in the corner of the wall up by the ceiling. This boy didn't have any eyes, just empty black sockets. Jane was startled to hear the same description from her late night encounter. She told Karen about what she had seen. 5 years later, Jane was now a mother. Her 2-year-old daughter was now using her old bedroom. Her daughter began waking up every night at the same time. She could hear somebody carrying on a long conversation. Jane asked her who she was talking to, and she was told there was a 10-year-old boy visiting in the middle of the night. He didn't have any eyes, just holes in his face. Jane immediately began looking for a new home. Two neighbors, I'll call them Pam and Sarah. A few of you might recognize those names. Pam would come home from work and find the milk jug in the pantry, or maybe sitting on the stove. Sometimes rolls of toilet paper would be found in the refrigerator. One day, while they were talking, Pam found out that Sarah was having the same things done at her home. Sarah might find a bag of cat food in the shower or the bread in the bedroom. They compared notes and decided there was some kind of a troublemaking spirit visiting both their homes. If it was making things interesting at Pam's house, Sarah could bet nothing weird would happen to her, and vice versa. When Pam was having an especially bad day, she pointed one finger out the window at Sarah's house and said, "Go bother her for a while." In a few minutes, the phone rang. Sarah said, "Thanks a lot. Now he's over here making trouble." If you are wondering who Pam and Sarah were, they're the main characters in my series of books called The Bag Company, The Bogus Anomalous Company. Uh, they It was just a fun story, bunch of stories I wrote. You can hear them on Storytime with Chris James. I read them. I didn't read them well, but I read them. Yeah, just in case you'd like a fun thing to listen to. Jill's folks moved around a lot due to work, and so she began living with her grandparents. She would get to visit her folks whenever they wound up living, wherever they wound up living, but only on weekends or during Christmas or holiday vacations. Uh, During one summer vacation, Jill wound up taking a nap in a huge room with lots of windows and very big mirror on one wall. She was deep asleep, laying facing the wall, when she felt somebody caressing the back of her neck. She thought at first that this had to be her grandmother, since she would do this once in a while. The hand felt very rough and calloused, which got her to thinking, wait a minute, my grandmother has very soft, smooth hands. This thought was followed by, she wasn't at her grandparents' house. She was at her folks' new home. She opened her eyes and looked into the mirror. She saw an ugly, wrinkled creature was standing behind her. Jill twisted around and jumped sideways away from whatever this creature was. She ran towards the door, but as she ran, she looked back, noticing there was nobody else in the room. She left the house and waited for her folks to get back. Once they got back, she told them that she really didn't like the house and she made it a point to never visit them on the weekends or Christmas and holidays until they moved to a new house. The Crescent Hotel was built in 1886. It was a spa in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. During construction, an Irish stonemason died while working in one of the rooms, a room 218. People report seeing hands reaching out through the bathroom mirror. A few say that they hear a man crying out in pain coming from that room. After falling into a state of disrepair, it reopened in 1908 as the Crescent College and Conservatory for Young Women. What is a conservatory? I always figure it has something to conserving things. They put you on a shelf and dust you once a week? It was a conservatory for young women. The institution closed down in 1924 and then it reopened again in 1930 as a junior college. After it closed in 1934, it was leased as a hotel for a summer. 1937, the hotel was converted into an experimental cancer hospital. Patients signed away their entire life savings in their quest for a cure. Dr. Norman Baker advertised that he had found a cure, and for a mere small fortune, anybody could come and be saved. Patients would stay in the hotel rooms and they would receive their treatments in the basement. Rumors began to circulate among the locals that Dr. Norman was performing bizarre, unethical, and dangerous medical experiments on the patients, and then taking the deceased patients through a tunnel to the local crematorium. The official number is 44 patients passed away at the Baker Cancer Hotel. There may have been more, seeing as the cremated remains are said to have been scattered around fields in the middle of the night. The hospital was open for 20 months. Dr. Baker was a millionaire, inventor, and radio personality who styled himself as a doctor even though he had never actually bothered to attend any medical schools and he had absolutely no formal medical training. He claimed he had discovered a cure for cancer and also he instigated attacks on organized medicine, which he said was a profit driven and completely corrupt institution. He'd been practicing medicine in Iowa without a license, and when the residents there found him out, he fled to Arkansas along with his cancer patients. He advertised the Crescent as his new health resort and designed to cure patients of various ailments just by drinking the natural spring water of the area. The law finally caught up with Norman when federal charges were filed against him in 1940 for mail fraud. He spent 4 years in prison. Never mind practicing medicine without a license. 1946, John R. Constantine, Herbert Byfield, Herbert Shutter, and Dwight Nichols bought the hotel. They wanted to restore it to its former glory. March 15th, 1967, the hotel was nearly burned to the ground. After the fire, nearly 30 years later, the hotel was purchased again for close to $1.5 million. It received a massive restoration and renovation. The crescent cats are a mainstay of the hotel, and guests have been petting them and feeding them since the first cat showed up. There have been many resident cats during the hotel's history, but in 1973, the hotel records tell of an orange tabby named Morris that walked into the lobby and never left. He stayed for 21 years. Anyone that knows cats, that is a long time for a cat to be around. Morris became such a fixture of the Crescent, he was referred to as the general manager. Everybody knew him, and guests as well as the staff looked on him as more than just a pet. When Morris finally passed away, more than 300 people attended his farewell ceremony and wake that was held at the hotel. He was buried on the hotel property on the east lawn, where you can even visit his headstone today. His photo is located in the hotel lobby, as well as a remembrance poem. Morris is regularly seen and heard meowing, and playing in the hotel lobby and halls. Frequently, guests that don't know about the former house cat will report that there's a loose cat roaming around the halls at night. They'll tell the folks at the front desk, and the staff will inform them that they have just seen a ghost. The guys on Paranormal Rundown were discussing whether or not animals had souls. Vic and JJ and David were on talking about various things that they talk about on the show. And one of the subjects was about animals and pet ghosts. I would say that yes, animals do have souls. The people seeing Morris thought he was a real live animal. He looked real and he didn't do any of the kinds of paranormal things. He just acted like a regular cat until he disappeared. So I would say that yes, animals do have a soul, which now leads to another question. What about cows? Since I really like hamburgers. Anyway, an investigation team was invited in to check for paranormal activity. They found a portal in the basement next to the room that had been used as a morgue. A cancer patient named Theodora is reported to be seen fumbling with her keys outside of room 419, as well as she has been seen tidying up rooms for guests. A couple named Richard and Mary Breckenridge passed away in the hotel due to complications that they developed while being treated there. Their 4-year-old child, Brecky, is seen throughout the hotel bouncing a red ball. Dr. John Fremont Ellis, the hotel's in-house doctor during the late 19th century, is seen in his office, which is now room 212. You can smell his pipe tobacco, which is an indication that he's present. Many ghost researchers and investigators believe that limestone has a special ability to absorb and release electromagnetic and psychic energy. Crescent Mountain, the hillside that the hotel sits on, is mostly limestone. The 18-inch stones used for the construction of the Crescent Hotel are also made of limestone. This is believed to be the reason for the multitude of guests reported to come out at the hotel. A few years ago, hundreds of glass bottles labeled secret formula, as well as jars containing medical specimens, that had been surgically removed from former patients was found hidden away in an unused part of the building. This was Dr. Baker's specimen collection. A dark, ominous figure has been reported roaming around the former morgue, and there have been an increase of reports of people saying they felt a hand, a disembodied hand, touching them. When George was a child, he was afraid of the dark. He told his mother he could hear voices coming from the rooms where there was nobody in them. The sounds weren't all that bad. Nothing evil was being said. It just got under his skin and caused him countless hours of anxiety and fright. His mother told him he was just imagining things. All that whispering was just the wind. The voices were just the house settling. On occasion, he would convince her to let him sleep in her room, but most nights George was alone with the voices. One night around Christmas time, George awoke and felt the need to relieve himself. When nature calls, you gotta go. George got up and walked to the bathroom. He had to pass the top of the stairs that led down to the living room. As he was walking, he heard somebody say, "Look." So he did. At the bottom of the stairs, shining against the wall, was a bright red light. George looked for the source of the light, but there was nothing to cause it. It was just a red glow up against the wall. Being very young, George thought this must be Santa coming for an early visit. He rushed down the stairs to see the man who nobody ever gets to see. As George was moving down the stairs, the red light began moving away from the wall. It traveled into the living room. A very gruff, harsh male voice stopped him in his tracks. The voice said he was to stop, turn around, and go back to bed. Okay, Santa's supposed to know who's been naughty and who's been nice. I would have guessed that this might have been Krampus instead. As George was doing as he was told, he heard a loud crash come from the living room. This got him running up the stairs and back to his room. The next morning, all the Christmas lights that had been strung up along the banister were all in a pile on the floor. A stand that held a sink was laying on the floor as well. No water was coming from it because it wasn't hooked up to anything. George's dad thought that somebody must have broken in and destroyed these things, but nothing was missing. George was the only one that noticed what looked like finger imprints on the sink. It looked like some huge, strong hand had squeezed the wood and sunk in. George did his best to never venture out of his room at night after that day. He took the voices as maybe being some kind of a warning of something evil in the downstairs and that he should never go down there at night again. The Red Lady of Huntington College is actually two ghosts that haunt the former Pratt Hall dormitory in Montgomery, Alabama. The first Red Lady appeared in the late 19th century while the college was still located in Tuskegee, Alabama. She was described as a young woman wearing a scarlet dress, carrying a red parasol, who walked wordlessly up and down the halls of the women's dormitory late at night. She was bathed in a red glow. After many residents had seen her, this apparition ultimately left the resident hall and disappeared from view as it walked out through the gateway to the college. The identity or origin of this wrath has never been determined, and she was apparently never seen again. The second Red Lady was a former student named either Martha or maybe Margaret. Nobody's last name has ever been associated with her. This young woman was sent to college by her father, despite not wanting to go there. She came from New York and didn't know anybody there or anything about the college. Both her parents had attended classes in Tuskegee. Her mother insisted that Martha had to study at the same place as her, an all-female school. Martha did not especially want to be in Alabama, especially that particular college. Her father was very wealthy, and he always got what he wanted. He was originally from Alabama, and he had met her mother there. When Martha arrived at the college, she was dressed in red, and she brought with her red draperies for the windows and a red bedspread for her room. She had a thing for that color. Seeing a young woman with everything in red kind of struck the other students as being odd. People who stand out in a place like this are either hoisted up high and become the center of attention, or they become the laughing stock of many who have a need to fit in with everybody else. Nobody ever found out what the big deal was with all the red stuff. Being a stranger and shy, as well as being very unhappy in this unfamiliar surroundings, Martha could not or would not make any friends. Other students realized not just her accent, but Martha was a lot different from they were. Her family had a lot more money than any of them, but she never used it to gather friends or those that act like friends. Martha was an introvert, and those around her thought she was stuck up. Word began to spread. Martha thought she was better than everybody else. As folks began to believe this, nobody ever tried to get to know her, which led to her becoming even more distant and self-conscious. Martha sat alone and apart from them in the dining hall, seldom spoke to her roommate. When other girls would drop by to visit her roommate, Martha appeared to be cold and unfriendly. This led to nobody wanting to visit her roommate, which led to her disliking Martha even more. Martha's roommate eventually found the situation unbearable and asked the house mother if she could be moved out. The house mother granted this request and put somebody else in the room with Martha, who took on an instant dislike of her. The second roommate also left her after only a week. This procedure happened again and again as one roommate after another found it impossible to live with her. The president of the dormitory, who was known for her ability to get along with everybody, moved in with Martha and did everything she could to make friends. This didn't work out because Martha just drew farther and farther into herself every day. As all the students treated her badly, Martha began to act the way they thought she was from the start. She became embittered as well as withdrawn, and she seemed to resent the presence of everybody around her. The president of the dormitory found herself growing depressed and despondent, trying to live with somebody who acted so cold. She packed her belongings and prepared to leave. Martha, who had not known her imminent departure, returned to the room. With a look of defiance, she said, "So you can't stand me either, like all the rest of your stuck-up friends. I'm glad to be rid of you. Take your things and go." A lot more was said about don't let the door hit you on the way out and things like that. A lot more was said, emotional things, things like she hated everybody at the college and etc., etc. Martha began to act a lot weirder, as if that wasn't already a lot weird, as she would just walk into other people's rooms unannounced without knocking. Just open the door, walk in. and then turn around and walk back out without ever saying anything to anyone. She would wander around the college grounds, avoiding others and acting as if they weren't even there. Her behavior became even stranger. She would wait until the lights were out and then visit one dormitory after another, never saying a word, but staring into space as if she were in a trance. As time passed, she took to walking up and down the halls during the darkest hours of the night. She would scare other girls by opening and closing their doors. One evening, after Martha had not appeared for classes or the meals all day, the dormitory president decided that it was her duty to have a look. As she neared Martha's room, she noticed flashes of red light shooting out into the corridor from the room's transom. Those of you that don't know what a transom is, it's a big window that they used to put up above a doorway to allow circulation of air. So when you're in an old building, you see a window above the door, that's a transom. She noticed bright red light coming through the transom. She opened the door, screamed, and fainted. Girls from all over the fourth floor rushed to see what was wrong. Martha was found on the floor of her room, dressed all in red, draped in her red bedspread, having committed suicide by slashing her wrists. Today, students at Huntington say that on the date of Martha's suicide each year, rays of crimson light flash down from the transom of her former room, and the Red Lady returns to haunt the corridors of Pratt Hall. Students have reported seeing Martha's ghost on Pratt Hall's fourth floor. They've seen her walking through walls or even closed doors. Pratt Hall has now been converted from a dormitory to College Department of Education and Psychology. In October of every year, the Chi Omega, the Phi Mu, and the Alpha Omicron, whatever that is, sororities at Huntington take part in the Red Lady Run. They paint their faces red, they wear all black, and they run around the campus. Why they don't dress in red, I don't know. Huntington College is also haunted by the spirit of a young male student who shot himself on the college green sometime in the 70s after he had been jilted by his girlfriend. Students have reported feeling unseen forces tugging on their clothes as they walk across the green at night. Sometimes a disembodied hand will mess up their hair. Other spirits haunting this portion of the Huntington campus include those of a murdered co-ed, a young boy who drowned in the college pond, a female student who's seen clad only in a towel, and a poltergeist known as Frank the Library Ghost. Why Huntington is such a place for so many spirits? Don't know. Makes me wonder about all the ghost sightings out at Fort McIntosh that is now the Laredo College. Tons of them. St. Louis, Missouri is a huge city right next to St. Louis, Illinois. If you travel west, you will come to a relatively untamed section of the Midwest. Near a bend in the Merrimack River, you can find one of the most sinister stretches of road in the country. I will give it a 4-star review. The place has been called the Zombie Road since the 1950s, though nobody is really sure about the origins of the name. Some say that at one time there had been a zombie killer who lived in one of the shacks near the abandoned road and preyed upon young lovers. Any place that becomes known as Lover's Lane is open to legends, hoaxes, and wild stories. Guys will tell their dates about scary occurrences in the hopes of a closer, warm body. They will spread stories among their buddies to act as more courageous than they actually are, or simply to scare their friends. Built sometime in the 1860s, the official name of the road was the Lawler Ford Road. The lane provided access to the river and the railroad tracks that ran alongside of it. Trees were allowed to grow right up to the edge of the road, causing it to be gloomy even in the daytime. At night, it was downright spooky. The road passes through an area that was once called Glencoe, which was a resort community where small houses were built along the river. When the community dried up in the mid 1940s, the road was abandoned. The small riverside houses were abandoned along with it. Locals say among these former homes dwells the ghost of an old woman who comes out and yells at passers-by. Probably yells, "Get off my yard!" From 1950 on, Zombie Road was a frequent setting for scary stories. Lover's Lane, a popular place for teenagers to party. The legends surrounding Zombie Road run the gamut from a zombie killer who's credited with giving the road its name, to accounts of an abandoned insane asylum, an orphanage that was run by sadists, and hikers, not hitchhikers, hikers who stumbled upon a cemetery filled with murdered children. People report seeing the ghost of a man who was hit by a train in the 1970s and is now haunting the area. There was also a woman who was hit by a train in 1876. Many people say that perhaps one or both of these is the actual source of all the hauntings. People passing through the area have seen shadow beings, dark humanoid shapes that appear in amongst the trees, and they seem to follow the travelers on the road. 2007, they made a documentary called Children of the Grave, which was on the Sci Fi Channel. It had photographs of some of these shadow beings. It isn't just believers who say that there's something creepy about Zombie Road. Even skeptics describe that the road is extremely claustrophobic, and they say that it seems as if it's never the same length twice. 2010, the road was repaved and rechristened Rock Hollow Trail, a gated 2.3-mile nature trail in what is now the community of Wildwood on the western edge of St. Louis suburbs. The spooky stretch was never able to shake the name Zombie Road, nor the sinister reputation it has attained. I hope you laid in a big supply of treats. Those little monsters dressed as monsters are coming. They want treats, or you will get tricks. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell others they should be listening as well. If you didn't enjoy tonight's show, what the heck are you doing still listening to me? You should have switched to Trailer Trash Terrors by now. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where there's strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.